The moment Daniel Foster grabbed Sarah Mitchell's arm and yanked her toward the kitchen, he sealed his fate. His fingers dug into her skin with unnecessary force, his breath hot against her ear, as he hissed about the minor mistake she'd made with a customer's order. What Daniel didn't notice, couldn't have noticed, was the sharp-eyed man in the corner booth who had been quietly observing the restaurant's operations for the past hour. Alexander Reed, owner of the Reed Restaurant Group and technically Daniel's boss 20 times removed, set down his fork with deliberate care, his expression hardening as he watched the scene unfold. Sarah winced but didn't cry out as she was pulled through the swinging doors. At 26, she had learned to handle difficult situations with grace, a skill she'd perfected during the 3 years she'd spent waiting tables to put herself through graduate school. Her honey-blonde hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, swung wildly as she stumbled behind the hulking figure of her manager. The kitchen staff, accustomed to Daniel's outbursts, averted their eyes. Only Carlos, the head chef, shot her a sympathetic glance before returning to the sizzling pans that demanded his attention. "This is the 3rd time this week," Daniel snarled, finally releasing her arm once they reached the back corridor where employee lockers lined the wall. "How difficult is it to get a simple order right? Medium rare means medium rare, not medium, not rare. Do you know how much these mistakes cost us?" Sarah rubbed her arm where his fingers had left red marks. "The customer didn't complain, Daniel. He said it was fine." "Fine isn't good enough at Westfield Grill," Daniel said, running a hand through his expensively cut dark hair. At 35, he'd climbed quickly to management position, not through exceptional skill but through a particular talent for taking credit and deflecting blame. "Maybe this job is too complicated for you. There are plenty of pretty girls looking for work who can actually remember simple instructions." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Sarah needed this job. Her graduate program in environmental law wasn't going to pay for itself, and her younger sister's college tuition was due next month. Their parents' insurance settlement after the accident was nearly depleted. "It won't happen again," she said quietly, hating herself for the submission but knowing she had little choice. Daniel stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Maybe we need to discuss your position here more thoroughly. Why don't you come to my office after closing tonight?" The suggestion, loaded with innuendo, made Sarah's stomach turn. This wasn't the first time he'd hinted at such a discussion, but he'd never been so direct. Before she could respond, the door to the corridor swung open. "Excuse me," came a deep voice that commanded attention without raising its volume. "I believe there's a situation that needs addressing." Both Sarah and Daniel turned to see Alexander Reed standing in the doorway, his imposing 6'2" frame filling the space. At 42, Alexander was the epitome of success. Self-made billionaire, respected entrepreneur, and philanthropist. His tailored charcoal suit couldn't hide his athletic build, maintained despite long hours at the helm of his business empire. Few of his employees would recognize him on sight. He preferred to keep a low profile, conducting anonymous visits to his restaurants to maintain quality control. Daniel's face paled. I'm sorry, sir, but this area is for staff only. If you'd like to return to your table, I'm quite aware of where I should be." Alexander cut him off, his blue eyes cold. "What I'm less certain of is whether you should be in your current position, Mr. He paused, glancing at the name badge. "Foster." "Daniel Foster, sir. I'm the general manager of Westfield Grill." Daniel's voice had transformed from threatening to obsequious in seconds. "Is there a problem with your meal? I'd be happy to—" "The food was excellent. The service, equally so," Alexander said, his gaze shifting to Sarah, who stood frozen, uncertain of what was happening. "What concerns me is the way I just witnessed you treating your staff." Daniel's smile faltered. "Sir, I assure you, this was simply a standard coaching moment. In the restaurant business, we sometimes need to provide immediate feedback to— I've been in the restaurant business for 20 years, Mr. Foster. I know the difference between coaching and intimidation." Alexander's voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the calm. He turned to Sarah. "Are you all right, Miss Mitchell?" "Sarah Mitchell," she supplied, still bewildered by the stranger's intervention. "I'm fine, thank you." Alexander nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't believe her. "Would you mind giving Mr. Foster and me a moment to speak privately?" Sarah hesitated only briefly before slipping past both men, careful not to brush against either as she made her way back to the main floor of the restaurant. Through the kitchen windows, she could see Daniel's face growing increasingly ashen as the well-dressed stranger spoke to him in low tones. Emma Taylor, Sarah's closest friend at the restaurant and fellow waitress, intercepted her at the service station. With concerned brown eyes, she examined Sarah's arm, where the marks from Daniel's grip were already beginning to bruise. "That bastard," Emma muttered, filling water glasses for her section. At 29, Emma had seen enough of the world to recognize injustice when it occurred. "You should report him, Sarah. This is getting worse." "To whom?" Sarah asked, arranging silverware on a tray. "He's the general manager. The district manager is his college roommate." Emma sighed, acknowledging the reality of their situation. "Well, who's the guy who followed him into the back? Table 12, right? He left a hefty tip and asked some questions about management." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel emerged from the back corridor, his face tight with suppressed rage. He stalked directly to the bar, poured himself a shot of whiskey despite the strict no-drinking policy, and downed it in one gulp. The mysterious customer was nowhere to be seen. The rest of Sarah's shift passed in tense silence. Daniel avoided her completely, focusing his attention on paperwork in his office. When closing time came, Sarah changed out of her uniform quickly, eager to escape the lingering discomfort of the evening. As she pushed open the employee exit door to the parking lot, the cool night air a welcome relief after the heated kitchen, a voice called her name. She turned to find the stranger from earlier, standing beside a sleek black Audi, illuminated by the soft glow of the parking lot lights. "Miss Mitchell," Alexander said, stepping forward but maintaining a respectful distance. "I was hoping to speak with you before you left." Sarah clutched her purse tighter, her caution warring with curiosity. "About what happened earlier? I appreciate your concern, but I really need to get home." "I understand," Alexander said with a nod, "but I wanted to give you this first." He extended a business card toward her. Sarah hesitated before accepting it, her eyes widening as she read the embossed text. "Alexander Reed, CEO, Reed Restaurant Group." "You're—" she began, understanding dawning on her face. "The owner of this restaurant, among others," he confirmed with a slight smile that softened his otherwise serious features, "and I'd like to offer you a different position within the company if you're interested." Sarah stared at him, suspicion replacing her initial shock. She'd heard too many stories about powerful men making offers to vulnerable women. "What kind of position?" Alexander seemed to read her thoughts. "A legitimate one, I assure you. Assistant manager at our flagship location downtown, with flexible hours to accommodate your studies. Emma mentioned you're in law school. Environmental law," Sarah corrected automatically, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, but this seems too convenient," Alexander finished for her. "Perhaps, but I make a habit of recognizing potential in people. What I witnessed tonight told me two things. Mr. Foster isn't fit for management, and you have exactly the kind of composure and resilience we value in our leadership team." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only a straightforward intensity that was somehow reassuring. "Think about it," Alexander said when she didn't immediately respond. "The position starts at twice your current salary, with benefits. My direct number is on that card. Call me tomorrow if you're interested. If not," he shrugged. "No pressure, but know that Mr. Foster won't be a problem for you or anyone else at this location going forward." With that, he turned and walked to his car, leaving Sarah standing in the dimly lit parking lot with a business card in her hand and a future that had suddenly, unexpectedly, begun to shimmer with possibility. Sarah sat in her small apartment kitchen the next morning, staring at Alexander Reed's business card as steam rose from her coffee mug. The apartment was quiet. Her sister Jessica had already left for her early class at the community college. The sisters had been on their own since the car accident 3 years ago that had claimed their parents' lives, leaving 23-year-old Sarah to become both sister and guardian to Jessica, then just 17. "Twice my current salary," Sarah murmured to herself, running her thumb over the embossed lettering of the card. The offer seemed too good to be true, which was precisely why she was hesitating. Life had taught her that windfalls often came with hidden costs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Did you call him yet? This could be your ticket out of Waitress hell." Sarah smiled despite her reservations. Emma had been ecstatic when Sarah told her about the encounter in the parking lot, insisting that Sarah would be crazy not to accept the offer. Not yet. Still thinking, Sarah texted back. "Google him," Emma replied immediately. "The guy's legit. Self-made billionaire, donates millions to education programs. No scandals." Sarah had already spent half the night researching Alexander Reed. Emma was right. His reputation was impeccable. The Reed Restaurant Group had started with a single diner 15 years ago and had grown to include 35 establishments across the country, ranging from casual eateries to Michelin-starred restaurants. Reed himself had come from humble beginnings, the son of a single mother who'd worked as a waitress herself. It was this last detail that had resonated with Sarah. Perhaps he'd recognized something in her situation that reminded him of his own past. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card, half expecting to reach a secretary or assistant. Instead, Alexander Reed himself answered on the second ring. "Mr. Reed, this is Sarah Mitchell from last night," she said, working to keep her voice steady. "Sarah, good morning," he replied, his tone warm but professional. "I was hoping to hear from you. Have you considered my offer?" "I have, but I have some questions first." "Of course. Would you prefer to discuss this in person? I'm at our downtown office this morning." An hour later, Sarah found herself in the sleek headquarters of the Reed Restaurant Group, being led through an open-concept workspace by a friendly receptionist. The office hummed with purposeful energy, employees moving between modern workstations or gathered in glass-walled conference rooms. Alexander rose from behind his desk when she was shown in, extending his hand in greeting. In daylight, she could see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours and heavy responsibilities. His office was surprisingly modest for someone of his stature, functional rather than ostentatious, with a wall of windows overlooking the city skyline. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair opposite his desk. "Coffee?" "No, thank you," Sarah replied, suddenly aware of her simple attire, jeans and a blouse, compared to the business casual dress of the employees she'd passed. She hadn't had time to change after her morning class. "I appreciate directness, Sarah, so I'll be direct with you," Alexander began, sitting down. "I wasn't entirely honest last night. I didn't happen upon Westfield Grill by chance. We've received several complaints about management at that location over the past 6 months, including 2 formal ones from former employees citing hostile work environment issues. I was there to assess the situation personally." Sarah's eyes widened. "So you were already planning to fire Daniel?" "Let's say his position was under review," Alexander replied diplomatically. "What I witnessed with you accelerated the decision. He's been removed from his position as of this morning." Sarah absorbed this information, relief washing over her at the thought of never having to deal with Daniel's harassment again. "And the assistant manager position? Is that real?" "Absolutely. Though after reviewing your resume this morning—" "My resume?" Sarah interrupted, confusion evident on her face. Alexander had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Emma was quite helpful. She sent it to our HR department first thing this morning. Hope you don't mind." Sarah made a mental note to both thank and chastise her friend later. "Go on. As I was saying, after seeing your qualifications, I'd like to offer you something different. We're establishing an environmental compliance division for the restaurant group, focusing on sustainable practices and reducing our ecological footprint. With your background in environmental law, I think you'd be perfect to assist our legal team in setting up the framework. The position would be part-time while you complete your studies, with the potential for full-time employment after graduation." Sarah stared at him, momentarily speechless. This wasn't just a better job, it was an opportunity to gain experience directly related to her field of study. "Why me?" she finally managed to ask. "You don't know anything about me?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I know you maintained your composure in a difficult situation. I know you've been putting yourself through law school while supporting your sister. I know you have a 3.8 GPA in a challenging program." At her surprised expression, he added, "As I said, Emma was very helpful, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. They rarely lead me astray." The conversation shifted to specifics: salary, responsibilities, expectations. By the time Sarah left the office an hour later, she had accepted the position and would start the following Monday. Walking to the bus stop, feeling almost lightheaded with the sudden turn of events, Sarah didn't notice the dark sedan parked across the street or Daniel Foster watching her from behind the wheel, his face contorted with rage. The weekend passed in a blur of excitement and preparation. Jessica was thrilled about Sarah's new opportunity, celebrating with a small cake she bought with her own part-time job earnings. Emma insisted on taking Sarah shopping for appropriate office attire, lending her money until Sarah's first paycheck would come through. Monday morning found Sarah navigating the downtown building again, this time as an employee. She was introduced to the legal team, 3 attorneys specializing in corporate law, who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the new environmental initiative. Her workspace was small but bright, with a window overlooking a courtyard garden. By midweek, Sarah had settled into a routine, attending her morning classes before heading to the office for the afternoon. The work was challenging but fascinating, requiring her to research environmental regulations and help draft company policies. Occasionally, she would glimpse Alexander in the hallways or cafeteria, always busy but unfailingly polite, stopping to ask about her progress. On Thursday, Sarah worked later than usual, absorbed in compiling data for a presentation. The office had emptied gradually until only security and a few dedicated employees remained. When she finally packed up her materials, the sky outside her window had darkened to deep blue. The parking garage was eerily quiet as Sarah made her way to the bus stop located just outside. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete, and she quickened her pace, an inexplicable unease prickling at the back of her neck. As she rounded a pillar, a figure stepped directly into her path. "Hello, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice unnaturally calm. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, his face looked gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. "Enjoying your new position?" Sarah took an instinctive step backward. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "Funny thing about being fired for misconduct," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, taking a step toward her. "It makes it difficult to find another management position, especially when the firing comes from the very top." "I'm sorry about that," Sarah said carefully, glancing around for security or other people. The garage level was deserted, but that wasn't my decision, wasn't it? Daniel's voice hardened. "One day you're a waitress, the next you're working in corporate headquarters. What did you do, sleep with him? Is that how it works?" Sarah felt anger rising to replace her fear. "You need to leave. Now." Daniel laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Or what? You'll call your billionaire boyfriend? I don't think so." He moved closer, backing her against a concrete wall. "You ruined my life, Sarah. 15 years in the restaurant business. Gone. Because you couldn't take a little criticism." "That wasn't criticism," Sarah said, forcing strength into her voice. "That was harassment, and you know it. Everyone knew it. You're lucky it was just your job you lost." Something dangerous flashed in Daniel's eyes. Always so high and mighty. "Let's see how Reed likes his new project when she doesn't show up for work tomorrow." He reached for her, but Sarah was quicker. The self-defense class she'd taken after the death of her parents hadn't been wasted. She ducked under his arm and brought her knee up sharply, connecting with his groin. Daniel doubled over with a howl of pain, and Sarah bolted, running toward the garage exit. Heart pounding, she burst through the door to the street and collided directly with a solid chest. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into Alexander Reed's concerned face. "Sarah?" "What's wrong?" he asked, taking in her frightened expression. Before she could answer, the door behind her slammed open again, and Daniel emerged, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You!" he snarled when he saw Alexander. "This is your fault." Alexander stepped in front of Sarah protectively. "Mr. Foster, you were terminated and banned from company property. I suggest you leave immediately before I call the police." Daniel hesitated, his gaze darting between them, calculation replacing blind fury. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing away slowly before turning to disappear into the night. Alexander turned to Sarah, his expression grave. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed, though her voice shook. "Just scared. He was waiting for me in the garage." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I should have anticipated this. I'm calling security and the police." As they waited for the authorities to arrive, standing in the safety of the well-lit lobby, Sarah looked at Alexander with newfound curiosity. "What are you doing here so late?" A faint smile touched his lips. "The same as you, I suspect. Work that wouldn't wait until morning." He hesitated before adding, "Though I admit I noticed your light was still on when I was leaving, I thought I might offer you a ride home, given the hour." Something warm unfurled in Sarah's chest at the simple kindness of the gesture. For the first time since their unusual first meeting, she allowed herself to see Alexander not just as a powerful CEO, but as a person, one who noticed when others needed help and didn't hesitate to offer it. The following weeks brought a strange new normal for Sarah. After filing a police report about Daniel's threatening behavior, she was granted a temporary restraining order against him. Alexander insisted on upgrading security protocols at the office, including an escort service for employees working late and enhanced monitoring of the parking areas. He also arranged for a car service to take Sarah to and from work until the situation was resolved. "It's too much," Sarah protested when he informed her of the arrangements. They were standing in the small conference room adjacent to the legal department, where Alexander had asked to meet with her privately. "Your safety isn't negotiable," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Besides, think of it as protecting a company asset. You're already proving invaluable to the environmental compliance team." It was true. In just 3 weeks, Sarah had helped identify several areas where the restaurant group could significantly reduce its environmental impact while actually saving money. Her blend of legal knowledge and practical experience from the restaurant floor gave her insights that the corporate attorneys lacked. "Fine," she conceded, "but only until we know Daniel isn't a threat anymore." Alexander nodded, though the set of his jaw suggested he wasn't convinced that day would come soon. The detective mentioned they haven't been able to locate Foster at his residence or known hangouts. This information sent a chill through Sarah. The idea of Daniel lurking somewhere, nursing his grievances, was unsettling to say the least. "Do they think he's left town?" "Possibly," Alexander said, though he didn't sound convinced. "They're continuing to monitor the situation." He paused, studying her face. "How are you holding up, really? This can't be easy on top of your classes and new position." The genuine concern in his voice caught Sarah off guard. She was accustomed to handling difficulties alone, protecting Jessica from worries, presenting a capable front to the world. Few people bothered to look beneath that surface. "I'm managing," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, it's been harder than I expected. I keep looking over my shoulder, imagining I see him in crowds. Jessica is worried too. She's staying with a friend because she doesn't want to be alone in our apartment." Alexander frowned. "I didn't realize your living situation was affected. We could arrange for temporary housing in a secure building, if that would help." "No," Sarah said quickly, uncomfortable with accepting more assistance. "We'll be fine. The police have been patrolling our neighborhood regularly." He didn't press the issue, but Sarah could tell he wasn't satisfied with her answer. Before either could speak again, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression tightened. "I need to take this. We'll continue this conversation later." Sarah nodded, watching as he strode from the room, already speaking rapidly into his phone. There was something compelling about Alexander Reed that went beyond his obvious success and good looks. He carried his responsibilities with a quiet dignity, treating everyone from the custodial staff to his executive team with the same respect. In the weeks she'd worked at headquarters, Sarah had never heard him raise his voice or lose his composure, even during tense negotiations or when facing setbacks. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Rachel Chen, the head of the legal department, entered with a tablet in hand. At 48, Rachel was a formidable presence, brilliant, demanding, but fair. "Sarah, do you have a moment? The board meeting is tomorrow and they're particularly interested in our sustainability initiatives. I'd like you to join the presentation." Sarah's eyes widened. "The board meeting? But I've only been here a few weeks." Rachel smiled, her sharp features softening. "And you've accomplished more in those weeks than some do in months. Alexander specifically requested your participation." Pride and nervousness warred within Sarah as she followed Rachel back to the legal department to prepare for the presentation. The opportunity to present directly to the board of directors was significant, a vote of confidence she hadn't expected so soon. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparation, and Sarah barely noticed the hours slipping by until Rachel insisted they both go home to rest before the big meeting. Outside, the car service Alexander had arranged was waiting, the driver standing attentively beside the vehicle. "Good evening, Miss Mitchell," he said, opening the door for her. "Mr. Reed asked me to inform you that he's had to fly to Chicago for an emergency meeting, but he'll be back for tomorrow's board presentation." Sarah nodded her thanks, settling into the comfortable back seat. She felt a peculiar disappointment at the news. She'd grown accustomed to occasional evening conversations with Alexander when they both worked late. Casual exchanges that had gradually evolved from purely professional topics to more personal ones. She'd learned about his childhood in a struggling single-parent household, his determination to create a business that treated workers fairly, his passion for sustainable practices. In turn, she'd shared stories about her parents, her responsibility for Jessica, her dreams of environmental advocacy. The car pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into evening traffic. Sarah leaned her head against the cool window, watching the city lights blur past. Her phone chimed with a text from Jessica. "Staying at Mia's again tonight. Quiz tomorrow. Love you." Sarah smiled, relieved that her sister had good friends to rely on during this uncertain time. She texted back a quick message of encouragement, then set about reviewing her notes for tomorrow's presentation. They were about halfway to her apartment when Sarah noticed something odd. The driver had taken a different route than usual, turning onto a less-traveled side street lined with warehouses and small industrial buildings. "Excuse me," she called forward. "I think we're going the wrong way." The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Short detour, ma'am." "There's an accident on the main route." Sarah frowned, pulling out her phone to check traffic apps, but found no reports of accidents in the area. An uneasy feeling settled in her stomach as the car turned down an even narrower street, slowing to a crawl. "I'd prefer to take the usual route, even if it's slower," she said firmly. The driver didn't respond, continuing to navigate through increasingly deserted areas. Sarah's heart began to pound as she recognized the telltale signs of danger. She tried the door handle, but the child locks were engaged. Her finger hovered over the emergency call button on her phone when the car suddenly pulled into an empty parking lot and stopped. The driver turned to face her, and Sarah gasped. Though he wore the uniform of the car service and a cap pulled low over his eyes, she now recognized Daniel Foster. "Hello, Sarah," he said with a chilling smile. "Sorry about the change in plans." Sarah's mind raced through her options. The doors were locked, Daniel blocking the only exit from the front. She needed to stall, to think. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, working to keep her voice level. "The police are looking for you. This isn't going to help your situation." Daniel's laugh held no humor. "My situation? My situation is that I'm unemployable in the industry I've dedicated my life to, thanks to you and your billionaire boyfriend. Do you know what it's like to apply for jobs when your last position ended with accusations of harassment?" "Those weren't accusations," Sarah said, anger momentarily overriding fear. "That was documentation of your actual behavior, which you're currently reinforcing by kidnapping me." His expression darkened. "I'm not kidnapping you. I just want to talk where we won't be interrupted. Make you understand what you've done." Sarah's phone vibrated in her hand. Daniel's eyes dropped to it. "Give me that," he demanded, reaching back between the seats. Sarah hesitated only a moment before handing it over. Fighting him physically in the confined space would be dangerous, and she needed to appear cooperative while looking for an opportunity to escape. Daniel checked the screen, scowling at the incoming call from A. Reed. He declined the call, then powered off the phone completely. "Your protector checking in," he sneered, pocketing the device. "Too bad he's in Chicago." Sarah's pulse jumped. How did Daniel know about Alexander's trip? Had he been watching them, gathering information? The realization that his obsession ran this deep sent a fresh wave of terror through her. "What's your plan here, Daniel?" she asked, trying to engage his rational mind if it still existed. "You can't keep me here forever. People will look for me." "I don't need forever," he replied, his voice unnervingly calm, just long enough to make Reed understand what it feels like to lose everything. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small revolver, confirming Sarah's worst fears. "We're going to take a little trip to an old hunting cabin my uncle left me, completely off the grid where we can have a nice long conversation about consequences." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't an impulsive act of revenge. Daniel had planned this carefully. The revelation made her situation infinitely more dangerous. "Now," Daniel continued, "you're going to move to the front passenger seat very slowly, and we're going to continue our journey. Any attempts to signal for help or escape, and things will get unpleasant, understand?" Sarah nodded, her mind working frantically. If she got into the front seat, her chances of escape would diminish further, but with the gun trained on her, she had little choice. She reached for the door handle between the seats, moving deliberately, buying seconds to think. Just as she was about to open the divider, a blinding light flooded the car interior. The sound of screeching tires filled the air as a vehicle pulled up sharply behind them, high beams illuminating the scene. Daniel swore, momentarily distracted by the unexpected interruption. He turned to look out the rear window, and in that instant, Sarah acted. She lunged forward, grabbing his wrist with both hands and slamming it against the hard edge of the divider. Daniel howled in pain, the gun discharging harmlessly into the car ceiling before falling to the floor. The back door was suddenly wrenched open, and Sarah found herself being pulled backward out of the vehicle by strong hands. She tumbled onto the pavement, scraping her palms, but immediately scrambling to her feet, ready to run. "Sarah, are you hurt?" The familiar voice cut through her panic. Alexander Reed stood before her, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression a mixture of concern and barely contained fury. "Alexander?" she gasped, disbelieving. "You're supposed to be in Chicago." "I never left," he said grimly, positioning himself between her and the car, where Daniel was still cursing and clutching his injured wrist. "I had suspicions about Foster." When the regular driver reported someone matching his description asking questions about your schedule, "I arranged a decoy trip and followed your car tonight." 2 men in plain clothes emerged from the vehicle behind them, drawing weapons and identifying themselves as police officers. Within minutes, Daniel was in handcuffs, being led to a police cruiser that had arrived on the scene, his protests falling on deaf ears. Detective Wilson, a serious-faced woman in her 40s, took Sarah's statement while paramedics checked her for injuries. Alexander hovered nearby, his face tight with concern. "He'll be charged with kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and violating the restraining order," Detective Wilson informed them when the initial assessment was complete. "With his priors and the evidence we have, he'll be behind bars for a long time." Relief washed over Sarah, leaving her suddenly exhausted. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Alexander was instantly at her side, a steadying presence. "I'm taking you home," he said quietly, his voice allowing no argument. "The board meeting can wait." As they drove through the city streets, in a genuine police escort this time, Sarah found herself struggling to process the evening's events. "How did you know?" she finally asked. "About Daniel. About tonight." Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "When I learned we had a driver asking specific questions about your schedule, I became suspicious. The company did a thorough background check on Foster after his termination and discovered concerning patterns, previous harassment complaints that were settled quietly, a history of vindictive behavior toward women who rejected him." He paused. "I should have had better security measures in place from the beginning. I'm sorry you were put at risk." Sarah shook her head. "You couldn't have known he'd go this far." She hesitated, another question nagging at her. "But why were you so involved personally? Your security team could have handled this." Alexander was silent for a long moment, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because somewhere along the way, ensuring your safety became about more than corporate responsibility or doing the right thing." He glanced at her briefly, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "It became personal, Sarah. More personal than I expected." The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Sarah felt her heart beating rapidly, but not from fear this time. "The board meeting," she said finally, changing the subject to safer ground. "I'm still presenting tomorrow." Alexander smiled, accepting the shift. "Absolutely. Though I think you've earned a late start in the morning." As they pulled up to her apartment building, Sarah noticed additional police presence, a patrol car parked across the street, an officer nodding in recognition as Alexander escorted her to the door. The night's events had been terrifying, but as she watched Alexander speaking quietly with the officers, ensuring her continued protection, Sarah realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time since losing her parents, she wasn't facing adversity alone. 3 months after Daniel Foster's arrest, Sarah stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel, addressing the annual conference of the National Restaurant Association. Hundreds of industry professionals listened attentively as she outlined the Reed Restaurant Group's groundbreaking environmental initiatives. "By implementing these sustainable practices across all 35 locations," she explained, indicating the graph projected behind her, "we've reduced food waste by 42% and energy consumption by 35%, while actually increasing profit margins by 12% in the pilot locations." From the front row, Alexander watched with undisguised pride as Sarah fielded questions from the audience with confidence and expertise. At 27, she had become the face of the company's environmental program, her combination of legal knowledge and practical restaurant experience proving invaluable. The board had been so impressed with her initial presentation that they'd created a new position specifically for her, Director of Environmental Compliance and Sustainability. As the session concluded to enthusiastic applause, Sarah gathered her materials, accepting congratulations from attendees who crowded around her. Alexander made his way to her side, subtly creating space around her, as he'd learned to do at these events when she began to look overwhelmed. "You were brilliant," he said quietly, when they finally had a moment alone in the corridor outside the ballroom. "The New York Times reporter wants to interview you for their green business section." Sarah laughed, the sound light and genuine. "A year ago, I was serving appetizers and dodging handsy customers. Now I'm talking to the Times about environmental business practices. Life is strange." "Life is what we make it," Alexander replied, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "You've earned every bit of this success." Their relationship had evolved cautiously in the months since the night of Daniel's arrest. Professional boundaries remained firmly in place at the office, but outside work hours, they had gradually allowed themselves to explore the connection that had been building between them since their first unusual meeting. Their first official date had been a simple dinner at a quiet restaurant far removed from the Reed Restaurant Group's holdings. Their conversation had flowed easily, focusing on books, films, and childhood memories, rather than work. The second date had been a hiking excursion to a nearby state park, where they'd discovered a shared love of nature and outdoor activities. By the third date, a community theatre production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, they had both stopped pretending they weren't falling for each other. Now, 3 months into their relationship, they had developed a comfortable rhythm, balancing their professional responsibilities with their personal connection. Sarah had insisted on maintaining her modest apartment, refusing Alexander's offer to move to a more luxurious building he owned, determined to preserve her independence even as their lives became more entwined. "The reception starts in an hour," Alexander said, checking his watch. "We have time for some fresh air if you'd like." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Please, these conference center lights are giving me a headache." They made their way through the hotel to a secluded courtyard garden, a peaceful oasis in the midst of the busy downtown area. The early autumn air was crisp but pleasant, golden afternoon sunlight filtering through the changing leaves of the maple trees. "I have something to show you," Alexander said as they settled on a bench beside a small fountain. He pulled out his tablet and opened a document, the final sentencing report for Foster. Sarah's expression sobered immediately. Daniel's case had moved through the legal system with surprising efficiency, thanks in part to the overwhelming evidence against him, and his decision to plead guilty to reduce charges rather than face a full trial. 12 years, she read, scanning the document, with possibility of parole after 8. She let out a long breath, setting the tablet aside. "It's really over." Alexander took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "It's been over for months. You don't need to let him occupy space in your thoughts anymore." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, allowing herself to feel the full weight of the closure. "I know, it's just seeing it official like this. It feels like the final chapter of a very dark book." "Ready to start a new one?" Alexander asked, his voice holding a note she couldn't quite identify. Sarah turned to look at him, suddenly aware of a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "What do you mean?" Alexander shifted to face her more directly, taking both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about the future, our future, and I have a proposition for you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, uncertainty flooding her mind. They'd only been dating for 3 months. If he was about to propose marriage, as wonderful as their time together had been, she wasn't ready for that step. "Alexander, It's not what you're thinking," he said quickly, reading her expression with the perceptiveness that had become familiar. "It's a business proposition. Well, partly business." Sarah relaxed slightly, curious now. "I'm listening." "I'm opening a new restaurant," Alexander explained, enthusiasm lighting his features. "Not just any restaurant, one that will be the flagship for all our sustainability initiatives. Farm-to-table concept, zero-waste operations, solar-powered staff profit-sharing program, the works. I want you to be my partner in it, not just implementing the environmental aspects, but as co-owner." Sarah stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Co-owner? Alexander, I don't have that kind of capital to invest." "That's not what I'm asking," he clarified. "Your investment would be your expertise, your vision. I've watched you transform our environmental approach from a corporate responsibility checkbox to a core business advantage. This restaurant would be the physical embodiment of that vision, a model for the entire industry." The proposal was breathtaking in its scope and the trust it represented. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, ideas she'd been cultivating but hadn't dared voice yet. "There's more," Alexander continued, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. "The location I've secured is in Seattle." Seattle, Sarah repeated, confused by this unexpected detail. That's across the country. Alexander nodded. It is. And I know you have one semester left at law school here, and Jessica is settled at her college. I'm not asking you to uproot your life right away, but I am asking you to consider a future there, with me. Understanding dawned on Sarah. You're moving to Seattle permanently? I'm planning to shift the company headquarters there gradually over the next year. We've outgrown our current space, and Seattle's progressive environmental policies make it ideal for our new direction. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I want you to be part of that new direction, Sarah, professionally and personally. When you finish your degree, when Jessica is settled in her studies, would you consider joining me there, building something together? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities. Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from struggling waitress to respected professional, from solitary provider to woman in love. She thought of Jessica, now thriving in her second year of college, developing independence and her own dreams. This isn't just about us, is it? She asked quietly. You're restructuring your entire company around sustainable practices, the same principles I've been advocating for. Alexander smiled, squeezing her hands gently. You've changed more than just our environmental policies, Sarah. You've changed how I think about the purpose of business itself. I've always tried to be an ethical employer, but you've shown me how a company can be a force for genuine environmental good while still being profitable. His expression grew more serious. And yes, it's also very much about us. I love you, Sarah. I want to build a future with you in every sense of the word. It was the first time he'd said those words, though Sarah had felt them in his actions for weeks. Hearing them now, in this context that interwove their personal and professional lives so seamlessly, she recognized the truth of her own feelings. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily once she allowed them. And yes, when I finish my degree, when the time is right, I'll join you in Seattle. A smile spread across her face as an idea took shape. Actually, Jessica has been talking about transferring to a school with a stronger marine biology program for her junior year. Several of the best are in the Pacific Northwest. Alexander's face lit up with hope and happiness. Really, you'd consider it? Sarah nodded, certainty growing within her. More than consider it. Let's do it. Let's build this sustainable restaurant model together. Let's show the industry there's a better way forward. Alexander pulled her close, their foreheads touching, as they shared this moment of aligned purpose and affection. Partners, then, in all things. Partners, Sarah agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The reception that evening took on a celebratory quality beyond the conference's official purpose. As Sarah moved through the crowd of industry professionals, now accepting congratulations not just on her presentation, but on the announcement of the new Seattle flagship restaurant, she caught sight of a familiar face across the room. Emma, her friend from the Westfield Grill days, waved excitedly. Now the general manager of that same restaurant, Emma had been one of Sarah's earliest supporters and remained a close friend. Look at you, Emma said as they hugged. Environmental crusader and restaurant mogul in the making, and dating the boss, she added in a teasing whisper. Sarah laughed, keeping her voice low. Not just dating anymore. We're moving to Seattle together next year, building a new restaurant and a new life. Emma's eyes widened. That's huge. Are you ready for such a big change? Sarah glanced across the room to where Alexander stood talking with industry colleagues, his posture confident, but his eyes occasionally seeking her out, as if reassuring himself of her presence. When their gazes met, a smile passed between them, one of shared purpose and private understanding. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, a year ago I was just trying to survive, pay the bills, finish school, take care of Jessica. I couldn't imagine having choices about my future. Now I'm helping shape the environmental practices of an entire restaurant group and planning a cross-country move with a man I love. She shook her head in wonder. Life takes such unexpected turns. It certainly does, Emma agreed. Who would have thought Daniel Foster's horrible behavior would ultimately lead you here? Sarah considered this. It wasn't just Daniel. It was also Alexander seeing something in me worth believing in. And me finally believing I deserved more than just surviving. She squeezed her friend's hand. We all deserve that chance. Later that night, as Sarah and Alexander walked hand in hand along the city's riverfront, the lights of the downtown skyline reflecting on the water, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The frightened waitress who had once been cornered in a restaurant back corridor seemed like a different person entirely. Penny for your thoughts, Alexander said, drawing her closer against the evening chill. I was just thinking about how far I've come, Sarah replied, and how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to keep moving forward. Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. My mother used to say that life's hardest challenges are often doorways to our greatest opportunities. Smart woman, Sarah said. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you, Alexander said with certainty. She always said I needed someone who would challenge me, keep me honest, make me think beyond profit margins. Sarah smiled up at him. And do I? Every day, he confirmed, stopping to face her under the soft glow of a decorative streetlight. You've changed my life, Sarah Mitchell. You've changed my company. And you've changed how I see the future. We've changed each other, she corrected gently. That's what real partners do. As they resumed their walk, plans for their Seattle venture flowing easily between them, Sarah reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. An arrogant manager grabbing a waitress, not knowing the billionaire boss was watching. One moment of cruelty that had ultimately opened the door to professional fulfillment, personal growth, and a love she hadn't dared imagine. Life was indeed what they made it, sometimes from the most unlikely beginnings.